I think I fixed my writing board. If not, um, I'll very quickly end up going back to typing. So apologies on that right now, but at least I can start, and that's my goal. So, like I said, last time we talked about how family has an impact on delinquency. This time we're talking about peers. So I hope you understand what a peer is. But if you are not familiar, a peer is someone of your social equal, someone that you are on equal footing with. I am not your peer, I am your teacher. But each other, you are all students, you are therefore peers as well. So that is what a peer is. And so, one important thing about delinquents, if you remember last time we said that the family is a large influence and impact on the child because that's how they learn, that's how they grow up. Um, and that's true for a long time. But then the peer group comes in, and that's when things change. So, truly, this is something that's supported by data, but um, I'm sure you can I'm sure you can familiarize or uh, you can understand because I'm sure you might have gone through something as well. But peers become a major influence. Like child social development is so heavily peer based. Um, Sorry, I should finish writing. So, yeah, peers end up becoming such a big part, major influence on our social development as we grow up, as we spend more and more time away from home, more and more time at school. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Chapter 9 going to be relevant again. Um, but when we spend time away from home, we spend time with people who are on the same level as us. So our peers, and this is social development. Um, we've talked about social equity and things like that, but something that I want to mention, and I'm sure I've mentioned it before in this class, but if not, let me be the one to remind you or tell you for the first time. This is a universal truth. You cannot argue this kind of fact. This is a universal human truth. Humans want to belong. Humans don't like being the outsider or the loner. Um, if someone likes to be specifically isolated from everyone else, we call this atypical. We call this antisocial, and antisocial behavior tends to be closely related to, you know, violent offenses, school shootings, things like that. So typically, the human want to belong is why peer groups become that major influence. Peers are our major influence because we realize that there are more people than just the family. We know we belong to our family, ideally, so we want to belong to other people. And so we do anything to join our peers. If our peers start getting involved with something, we get involved with it too. This is why trends happen. This is why uh, entire fashion trends, gaming trends, pop culture, all that stuff. It's what brings people together. It's because we want to belong. But you know, the ultimate way to belong, and I'm joking, I say that facetiously, is gangs. So obviously, uh, gangs in particular, they're the direct pure delinquency. Like, if we had to point to one thing that would show perfectly what I'm talking about when I say pure delinquency, it's gangs. Gangs are groups of people of similar status, stature, beliefs, whatever, but they get together and they do stuff together. They do stuff that may or may not be legal. And the reason they do that is because that's what they do, and that's what they enjoy, and that's how they bond, and that's how they make money, and that's how they like truly all this comes down to is that pure delinquency. Gangs are the ultimate way. Um, in case you didn't know, by the way, as far as peers are concerned, by the early teens, children report that their friends give them emotional support when they are feeling bad, and that they confide intimate feelings to peers without worrying about their confidence being betrayed. Yeah, we trust each other, which is kind of hilarious, just in general. But so something I want to talk about with gangs in particular. I know I'm a little back and forth on stuff, but um, it's just kind of one of those funny moments where you go, huh. The 1920s, we saw an individual study gangs. We have a Frederick and the best last name for gang research, Thrasher. Um, so in particular in the 1920s, um, our individual Frederick Thrasher was doing research into the origins of the modern gang and things like that, and he found a lot of different pieces of information. Um, but one of the big things that he found, why I bring up his name, is that uh, according to him, adult society didn't meet the needs of lower class youth. And so the gang solved that problem by offering excitement, fun, and opportunity. If adult life and society was more fun, there wouldn't be a need for gangs. And I think that's just an interesting concept to consider because if you think about it, especially if you grew up in the Erie area, the classic joke of there's nothing for you to do once you become a teenager. Like as a kid, you're young, you can enjoy the zoo, the park, Waldemere, Conneaut Lake Park. Like you can have fun. But as a teenager, there's nothing to do, and until you're 21 and able to drink, there's nothing you can do. And it's like, gosh, it's boring. So you get involved in gangs, at least according to Frederick Thrasher. I just wanted to put that out there. Um, but in case you didn't know, there are some rules to what qualifies as a gang, and I am going to mention one of my favorite gangs that aren't a gang, but whatever. So gangs are they have to have members that are self recognition of their gang status and use special vocabulary, clothing, whatever it may be. So there's an identity outside, and that there's a commitment to criminal activity or whatever it may be, even though they're not always committing crimes. The idea is that you commit yourself to this one specific piece. And so, actually, funny enough, the National Gang Center, which is a national wide like research into gangs and watching that and groups have three or more members, generally ages 12 to 24. Members share an identity, typically linked to a name and often other symbols. Members view themselves as a gang and they are recognized by others as a gang. The group has some permanence and a degree of organization, and the group is involved in an elevated level of criminal activity. Long story short, they gotta call themselves a gang, be recognized as a gang, and commit some kind of crime, and that makes them a gang. So, of course, that's where I have to mention the Juggalos. And our textbook does bring them up later on when they talk about mixed gangs, because there are different types of gangs. But in the mixed aspect of the gang, Juggalos, the fans of the Insane Clown Posse, which is a band, they qualify, but they don't. It's a whole thing. But yeah. Anyway, um, one of the things that our textbook brings up that I think a lot of people tend to forget is that gangs are not exclusive to large cities. They can be found in very rural areas as well. And so, actually, our text has an image of a Native American Sioux uh, girl who's part of a gang holding a weapon, an M1 assault rifle. Due to the bad condition on the reservation, there's Native American gang. Like, it's not great. That means that it can happen anywhere. Are there gangs in Erie? I would guarantee it. Do I know of them? No, and I'm glad I don't. But this is something that's not just oh, that's an LA problem. Oh, that's a New York problem. No, it's a problem everywhere. Gangs are an issue, just in general. Um, but yeah, um, almost as if it's related to like everything. I swear, by the time we get to the final, economic stress is going to be like the key buzzword for every answer. Um, so why do I write it here? Well, because when we think about gangs and we think about peer groups in particular, economic stress plays a big factor in potential juvenile delinquents becoming members of gangs. Uh, it could be it's a lucrative business thing that allows them to get out of that economic stress, or the economic stress leads them to needing some kind of outlet, and therein lies the gang and the gang activities. So it's so interesting that so many of our issues with juvenile delinquency and crime in general in the United States and across the world tends to be economic stress. It's almost as if money wasn't the problem. We might have less issue. Anyway, my clearly non-capitalistic views aside, um, the next piece I really want to talk about is the four categories of gangs. Wee. So there are four kinds. There are social gangs. There are party gangs, and we'll talk about each one of these here in a second. There are serious delinquent gangs. And then, last but certainly not least, we have organized gangs. So, what the heck does it mean to be any of these types of gangs? So, a social gang is typically few delinquent activities and very little drug use. The idea here is that a social gang really is just a group of people that identify as a gang, get together, are recognized as a gang, but they don't really do that much. Yes, they still do, they commit crimes and things like that, but that's not what they're known for. They're just kind of there. Um, Party gangs are a little bit of a misnomer, and when we get to the impact of drugs on juvenile delinquency, it'll make more sense. But party gangs are really heavy into the drug use and drug sales. Um, that's kind of their whole thing is drugs, and it's because why does it say party? Well, because drugs are highly connected with teenage and young adult partying scene, so it makes perfect sense. Serious delinquent gangs, they avoid drugs almost exclusively. Like they do all sorts of serious crimes and whatnot, but they avoid drugs. That's not what they're into. So social might do some drug use, maybe sell some drugs, but serious delinquent gangs don't. And that, of course, leaves the last one, organized gangs. And organized gangs are heavily criminal. These are groups that could be considered organized crime groups. We're talking like the mafia, the yakuza, all these like big name famous ones that you know of that aren't gangs but like criminal organization. Excuse me, organizations. This is the type of crime that these gangs and juvenile delinquents belong to. And so the question that someone might ask, and the answer is already there, economic stress, but why would someone join a gang? Well, it's job opportunity. Uh, and the unfortunate other part to this is as jobs disappear, gang life looks good. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not putting down any kind of work. I know I'm very pro, uh, call it sex work, but it's, adult entertainment, individuals who choose to sell things on OnlyFans and whatnot. Like, if that's your method, go for it. I'm not, but if that's your thing, I get it. But as jobs disappear and economic stress rises, you're looking for ways to make the bare minimum money. And gang life looks pretty good for some people, especially when it offers a way to make money. And that's the unfortunate reality of gang life, is that as the jobs disappear, gang life looks good. And that's why, despite the fact that our national gang uh, recognition looks at ages 12 to 24, we're seeing more and more gangs have older and older members. That number is changing yearly. And it's because these manufacturing jobs that once existed here have been shipped overseas, and fewer people are able to, oh, I aged out of the gang, now I can go to work as a factory worker. No, that's not an option. I guess I'm part of the gang and for the rest of my life. And this changes so much. Like, there is a huge impact on just how much emotional damage, but economic stress plays on the entire life, the life cycle of an individual. They go from being part of a gang because their peers are a major influence and they want to belong, so they join the gang and they're there. And as they grow up, they don't have a job opportunity, and so now they're stuck being in a gang for the rest of their lives. That changes everything. So there's something to be said about this kind of issue. And oh, don't worry, we're going to talk about some other pieces with this. But so, on top of the economic status and the economic stress behind these things, I'm going to ask a question that seems super obvious, and our textbook does talk a little bit about it, but I just want to ask, why do youths join gangs? And so obviously, we understand the economic stress. We understand the sense of belonging that individuals want to feel. So we obviously have some answers, but our authors also put forward that there's actually a lot of potential other reasons for why individuals get involved with gangs and things like that, and it's kind of weird and interesting. Um, and so, like, we have biological factors. So, why do youths join gangs? Well, the biological thing is it satisfies a primal desire for ritual, and that's another thing. Like, humans, we are ritualistic beings. We like to do things that work in a certain way, and we do them over and over and over again. So, it satisfies this primal desire for a ritual as well as belonging. Obviously, there's a social aspect which we have talked about a little bit already, but disorganized places cause chaos, and chaos is best managed when you're in a group, and so gangs offer that. Um, with this one is also alienation. So, if you are already ostracized and not part of the mainstream, you're going to tend to come together. There's a trait aspect to this, and that is that, gang members have similar traits as you. So, again, this belonging kind of brings you there. I mentioned this already, but life course, different parts of your life, something happens, and that's how you end there. And then obviously, we have this. Now, I'm putting this in quotation marks. Rational choice means that they made the smart decision for betterment of their life. They made the conscious decision. Maybe it's not rational, like, oh, well, why would you join a gang? That's not a really rational choice. I get where you're coming from, but it is a quote unquote rational choice because they made it consciously and deliberately. not that it is, in fact, rational. And so, um, before I wrap up this section of the notes, I just want to talk a little bit about how our chapter 8, starting on page 222 and goes all the way to 225, um, this really gets into the different ethnic and racial composition of gangs that we have. So we have African American gangs, we have Latino gangs, we have Asian gangs. We also have hybrid gangs, which where the Juggalos fall in, which are the mixed gangs, as well as Anglo gangs or European white gangs. Um, Obviously, there's a lot to talk about these, but talking about them as a white person makes me feel extremely racist and offensive. So I'm not going to dive too deep into it. But important to note that we do see a specific different type of culture in different gangs depending on in particular what ethnic or racial group that they're made of. Obviously, you might be familiar. One of the more common things as far as African American gangs is having the nickname Lil as part of your name. So things like Lil Uzi, that kind of thing. That's part of the gang lifestyle of the African American gangs, as well as Baby, Dre, things like this. So obviously, that's part of it. Just to cover Latinx gangs, tends to have a strong machismo or masculine, over the top kind of thing. It's part of that cultural identity as far as gang structure is. Um, Obviously, I don't want to really get into it, but in particular, Asian gangs have a very different structure style and tend to be heavier in gambling than others. And then Anglo gangs tend to be white supremacy, very racist skinhead culture. Not going to say any more about that. But then, like I said, hybrid gangs are, it's not just one group, it's a larger amalgamation or group. And so, just going to kind of put that out there and leave it at that. Um, I'll pose a question for you real quick. Why do gang members engage in delinquency? Uh, hint, hint, page 226 of chapter 8. You might find the answer and might show up as a question on a final exam. That's the best that I can possibly give as far as hints without telling you exactly what to do. But let us talk briefly, and this is the last thing we're going to talk about for this particular lecture. How do you control gang activity? Where's the pen? There we go. And I ask you to think about this question because there's not an answer, at least not a straightforward answer. So I'm going to encourage you to think about this because it might come up as a discussion board, it might come up as a question on an exam. But how do we control gang activity? And so it's important to note that there are two very different views on how we control gang activity. And truly, I've mentioned it before, but when we talk about being part of the juvenile justice system, there's the clear criminal justice side, which we are all talking from. But the juvenile justice system itself is inherently very rooted in social work as well, sociology and psychology. It's not just be a police officer, it's be an understanding caseworker and understand what your individual's going through. And so for law enforcement, how they control gang is youth service programs, gang details, and gang units. The idea is that, you know, the kind of more policing and punishment that you can put in to place is going to reduce the number of gang activities and gang violence, and not allow gangs to group together, and so that's going to reduce gangs. And great, that's a great idea, but it doesn't always work. And so here comes the other side, and that's where we go, well, does the social work side work? Yeah, but it also has its problems too. So the other side is the community control efforts. And so law enforcement, like I said, they really are trying to uh, put harsher punishments and put more enforcement. Um, they are focused on that. But the more social aspect of it is, let's actually like work with groups and try to educate. We're trying to teach individuals. We're trying to uh, get members of gangs to actually like leave gangs. We're trying like there are things out there. There are treatment plans and intervention plans and things like that where they get to individuals who may be at a higher risk of going into a gang or may have already been in a gang, and to get them out. Like there are those programs, and these are all under the social or the community control efforts. Um, the idea here is that instead of having authority and saying, okay, you're under arrest, or okay, you're in trouble now, the community side is, okay, you made some mistakes, but let's get you back to normal. Let's reintroduce you to society. So both attempt to do the same thing, which is reduce the crimes that a gang can commit and reduce that kind of delinquency, but both of them have their issues. And so again, I ask you, and I leave you with this question: how do you control gang activity? Like I said, it might show up on an exam, it might be a discussion board. You never know, but hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Think about it. Think about what we just talked about. And I urge you to look deeper into uh, gang activity and see, well, what can we do to make a difference? Might even be a good subject for your paper, which will be talked about in a separate video. All right. That being said, I'm going to end this one. Come back for our Chapter 9 discussion, which will be talking about schools and delinquency. And then we'll wrap up in Part 4, which is Chapter 10, where we talk about drug impact on, on juvenile delinquents. All right. Thanks for listening.